Welcome to CPF Firewire, a podcast from California professional firefighters where we discuss a wide range of issues affecting firefighters, our unions, our families, and the communities we serve.
Hello and welcome to the CPF Firewire. I'm CPF President Brian Rice, and as your firefighter voice in the halls of the Capitol, CPF's mission is simple and very focused. We work on the issues that impact firefighters, their families, and public safety. And in advocating for our members, CPF takes a nonpartisan approach, and we work with Republican and Democrats in the legislature, and we stand with those who stand with us. And it also helps when there are leaders in government who have walked in our boots as firefighters themselves. And today on the Firewire, I'm pleased to have someone with me and joining us today who has both of those qualities. And want to welcome Heath Flora. Heath is a Republican Assembly member from the city of Ripon, which is in the northern area of San Joaquin Valley. He currently represents the 9th Assembly District, which covers parts of 5 Central Valley counties. He was first elected to the legislature in 2016, and Heath actually served for over 15 years as a volunteer firefighter, and then he spent 3 years working for CAL FIRE. And since he came to Sacramento, Heath has been a steadfast champion for our members. He stood with firefighters even when it hasn't been easy, and I've stood there with him when it hasn't been easy for him to do so. And Heath, it's been a long time coming, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the CPF Firewire. Thanks for being here today.
No, it's great to be with you. Appreciate the invitation. Look forward to it.
You were a firefighter. You are one of us. You were, are, and always will be. Talk to me about kind of your path into the fire service, what it was like for you growing up, and then how did you make that transition into the legislature? What interested you in law and policy at a statewide level?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. So it was probably freshman year of high school. I started getting involved. Yeah, then really junior year, got involved as a fire explorer with Slide of Fire, just outside of, just a little bit south of Ripon where I live. Was an explorer with Slide of Fire, was a volunteer with Slide of Fire. 2005, got hired with CAL FIRE, and that was just an incredible experience. Moved over to Woodland Avenue as a volunteer firefighter there and kind of moved up through the ranks there. But through that relationship, got to know Jair very well and all the Modesto guys. One thing about the Central Valley, the relationship between volunteers and paid is usually very strong. And it's something that we have a mutual respect for each other, and it's something that has always been appreciated. And so Senator Anthony Cannella was a dear friend of mine, and we were up in Sacramento. I was always just his friend. Yeah, and if he would have told me a decade ago that I'd be involved in politics, I said, "You're out of your mind." This was not the career path that I thought I was going to be on. But we're in Sacramento, and as a Republican that understands labor issues, my family's in small business and agriculture. One day we were at CHOPS, now it's Prelude.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Hey, you should think about running for office." Assemblywoman Olson, who held that seat, was terming out. And so we said, sure. And at that time, there was 4 other Republicans, 2 Democrats in that seat. It ended up becoming a Republican-on-Republican race. CPF is a huge reason that I got elected. And so it's just been a great partnership. And when you get to Sacramento, you realize very quickly that, the Democrats are in control, and that's okay. We as Republicans can find our niches. We can find ways to be relevant. And, when you realize that you are one vote, when you realize that you need 40 other friends, and you don't get friends by being a jerk. You don't get friends by not being able to build relationships. And I've used this term a lot, and I really do credit the fire service, public safety, whether wherever you come from. But people don't call 911 because they're having a really good day. Right? They just don't. Nobody calls an elected official's office because they're having a really good day. And so when you can take a step back and you realize that you're there to support them, you're there to make their bad day a little bit better, it's all public service to me. And so to serve, whether it's on a fire line with CAL FIRE or in the state capitol, to me, it's public service. And it's just part of what makes me tick as a human being. So it's a lot of fun to be serving in this capacity and serving and protecting the firefighters in the way that I can.
It's that really speaks to your motivation to seek elected office and be there. In the legislature, what are some of your top priorities that you look at for your district and then also for the state? Just a couple of them, certainly within public safety and then without. What's important to you and the people you represent?
I think on the public safety front, this understanding that cancer-related illnesses are absolutely prevalent within the fire service, right? And I think the last number of years, CPF has done a really good job of putting light on those. I feel like those are very nonpartisan issues if we educate people properly, and I think we are. We're getting there. It's taken a little bit of time, but I think we're getting there because, I mean, we look at recruitment rates. I mean, recruitment's down, and I think a lot of this is maybe a generation that just doesn't understand the fire service just yet. And then there's some legitimate, health concerns when you decide to serve in this capacity. It does not come without risk.
Right.
On the putting on the business friendly side of my hat, my district, a lot of folks in the legislature simply don't understand business. And it's not necessarily a knock on them. When I first got elected in the state assembly in 2017, there was 17 of us that had held private sector jobs. 17 out of 80, right?
Wow.
So, and that's Republican and Democrats alike. So when you talk to people about how a policy is going to hurt the small business community, it's not because they knowingly are just trying to hurt you or they don't care. They simply don't know. And I think it's been a lot of fun to really engage and try to get our colleagues to understand like how a particular policy affects the small business community.
Your experience as a firefighter and somebody who has worked in the private sector and been a small business owner, how's that experience kind of guided you in the legislature and just kind of build an understanding, like we always say, an across the aisle understanding? It's
a great question, and my number one priority is to represent the 9th Assembly District, right? Those are my constituents. Those are the people that put me in office, and so that is my job. Very close to that, though, is, representing the firefighters, because that is something that is near and dear to my heart for a lot of different ways. Obviously, my family's in small business in the state of California. We're in manufacturing. So it is a very interesting dynamic because not all the times do those things align. In ACA 13, I think you're sort of seeing that. Like there is competing interests in those things. I think one of the things that really helps me out is the relationship that we have with a lot of the trades, with the firefighters, is this understanding that like I represent a Republican seat, so it's going to take me a little bit more time to educate my constituents on an issue, right? A lot of times people, when you read a bill, a piece of legislation, they usually get the Cliff Notes version.
Right.
And they may get that Cliff Notes version from an amendment that wasn't even, relative anymore. Like it was just, it's obsolete because you know how the bill process works, right? I mean, things change a lot. So we see that a lot within, constituents where they're maybe reading an old piece of legislation that the bill has moved on. So it is up to the elected officials. It's up to me to go educate them. And once you educate people on an issue, they may not always agree with you, right? But at least they respect you and the position that you have because it's thought out. And a lot of times people don't really need you to be right. They just need to be listened to.
I never thought about this as an assembly or a Senate person in your district, how much educating you have to do with your constituents. That's one that I never thought of, and it makes such sense.
No, it does. I mean, there's a lot of bills that we take, a lot of votes that we take on pieces of legislation that you never hear a word from.
Yeah.
But then there's also a lot of bills that, I say a lot, there's really not. There's probably 5 a year, maybe 10 on a busy year that really take time. And I really think that's something that elected officials have gotten lazy at. COVID was the worst thing that could ever happen to an elected official because I feel like our job, once again, is to represent constituencies. And when your doors are locked and they're not able to access you, then we're not doing our jobs. And so I am a big fan of that education. Going to a Democrat or a Republican Central Committee isn't always the best of times, right?
Right. You're right.
It's just not.
No.
It can be a little brutal at times, or it can be great. It just kind of, is what it is.
You see the extremes on the spectrum.
Yes, you do.
Within the party.
Yep.
And whether it's, super liberal, super conservative, both parties do that.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's a hard place to be.
But when you go and you took a tough vote and you take it on the chin and you answer the questions, there's whether they like it or not, there's a mutual respect there. And I think it's super important not to just shut people out.
Let's go back to one of your first pieces of legislation in support of CalJack and pre-apprenticeship academies. And, these academies, they help provide a path into the fire service, especially in areas where folks are either underrepresented or disadvantaged. In 2017, you carried AB 579, which really helped get these academies off the ground. Kind of when we came to you with that, what were your thoughts going into it? And then where do you find yourself today, not just with that legislation, but as we move forward and build off of that?
So it's interesting, that particular piece of legislation, it's crazy. It's 2017.
I know.
It's ridiculous how fast time flies. A lot of times kids don't know what's out there.
Right.
And especially, you take West Modesto, west side of my community, for a long time, the fire service had a hard time recruiting people that looked like the community that they served.
Yes.
And so if we were able to do that, so that kind of mindset, plus working with these gentlemen that came through the fire programs, and now we're just incredible firemen that I had the privilege of working and serving with, was kind of why I fell in love with that bill. Because if we can have somebody go speak to a school, go teach an academy, be a guiding influence in somebody's life, we never know where that kid's going to turn out.
Yeah.
And I am a firm believer, and it's why I love the trades. If we can have people work in the communities that they live in, they grow up in, there's a tremendous amount of benefit to that. So it was one of the big reasons I love that piece of legislation.
I'll tell you, when we first started, it started over the pre-employment academy with EMT. And currently I think we have at least one paramedic class going right now. We might have two. My apologies for not having that off the top of my head. But where we started and where we are, and you hit it, I think we have an obligation as firefighters and in the communities we serve, all of us, we have an obligation to reflect the communities that we serve. And what's interesting, and a lot of people, when you have the conversation, sometimes people just go nuts. Oh, we're going to lower standards. We're going to do, it's like, hold on, stop. Yeah. Everybody put the brakes on. No one is talking about that. Yeah. What folks are talking about would be bringing opportunities into communities that even if the opportunity passed through the community, it was at such a level that nobody identified with it.
Right.
I don't know anybody that does that. I've never seen anybody that looks like me that does that. That's not for me. Yeah. And it's interesting how when you just start engaging people and talking about the opportunity, you're not going to get everybody. No. But I think that piece of legislation, Heath, it's still in its infancy. We're still growing it. I think that is going to be a game changer for the California Fire Service.
I think that there's a lot of misconceptions with the Republican Party and labor, right, across the board, right? And part of it's our own doing. We have not done a great job of having these conversations, but it is something that, coming out of the labor, background that I have, I'm super excited about our caucus right now because we are making those changes. We are educating. And it's largely because the trades and CPF have really come to the table with us, right? And I'm not the only Republican that's that way, right? And I mean, our leader, James Gallagher, is that way. A few of our members, and it's something that I'm excited about, the firefighters engaging with our party more than we've ever seen before. Like, it really is encouraging to me, because when we sit down and have those conversations, listen, we're going to probably agree on 8 out of 10 issues. And that doesn't make me 20% my enemy, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
80% my friend,
yes.
right? And so I think there's this, we don't have to agree on everything. There's this C word in politics that everybody gets all spun up about. It's called compromise. Well, and to me, that's just life. What part of your life do you go through on a daily basis that there's not some sort of compromise? Politics is nothing more than that.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I've been a leader in labor almost my whole career, and you're 100% right. It's there when you get into these areas, and if you want to be black and white on whatever it is, doesn't matter to me, you're going to be miserable, and your chances of success are not going to be super high. Right. Once in a while, those black and white areas hit, and everybody hits on them, and we all get it. Right. But for the most part, I've watched good legislation develop through working together and compromise. And this is what I appreciate. We don't live in kind of that, we watch kind of that national relationship, political relationship. And I appreciate the fact that we work hard not to let any of that get on us. Yeah. That we focus on the business at hand, and we focus on where we can work together and help each other. And I want people to take this the right way, because that is what it's about. Yeah. Sometimes you have issues that, hey, Brian, this one hits here and it's important here. It does affect you. Will you guys consider coming in and supporting us on this. And because of our relationship, it's like, yes, we'll consider it. And some of those things, we've done, we're in, we'll do it. Some of them, it's like, hey, can you consider this part? And you've done the same thing with us. That's how we're successful. And that's how we, I think, not only move the ball forward for firefighters, but we move the ball forward for the constituents in the 9th District, for the folks that you take care of.
100%. And I completely agree with you. I think this idea that, politics is singular, it's singular focused, I think is just a fascinating dynamic. And we have colleagues on both sides of the aisle, not a lot right now, that are that way, right? And once again, I'll go back to COVID. When I got elected, a lot of the building had worked together for at least 8 years, 6, 7 years, or getting ready to term out. But there was some senior guys, former Senator Tom Berry, who has passed away now, but, Senator Anthony Cannella, Senator Tony Atkins. Like, there's just a group that had been around for a minute, right?
Yes.
And so us young guys come in, and our job is to shut up and learn, right? Just listen, right? Novel idea, right? Through COVID, though, we went through a couple election cycles, a couple specials, and really almost 2/3 of the building has turned over.
Isn't that something?
We've never had the opportunity to have collegiality. We've never had the opportunity to go break bread together, to go have a beer together, to build that relationship. My colleague, who's the majority leader, Isaac Bryant, we come from very different places, right? But we're very good friends because we believe in the institution and making the institution run. He's the majority. I'm the Republican floor leader. We work together on a daily basis. And there's a ton of mutual respect there. And I am excited in the next few years because I will say this last year was rough. It's probably the roughest I've seen it since I've been elected. And I blame that largely because we haven't had time to work together. Yeah. And once we can kind of put a few people on quiet time and then let the rest of us get to work, I'm super excited about that.
What do you see coming up? You've got a couple of big bills out there.
Yeah.
AB 1254. That's a big one. Take us through that.
The CAL FIRE one. Yeah, I can get really blunt with that one.
Get as blunt as you want.
Well, listen, the men and women that work for the state of California, which is obviously very passionate of mine, have, in my opinion, been underpaid, probably forever. And they are incredibly hardworking people. And to bring some parity, I think is really, really important for a lot of different reasons. Right. Retention is one of them, right? A lot of the friends that I've worked with are now BCs for the state. And to be able to run this is really, really exciting for me. It's also been really frustrating. Some of the numbers that Department of Finance has thrown out related to this bill, I just think are garbage. I think it's a cop-out. When you get a span from 16 million to 100 million, I feel like there's a lot of numbers in between on what the actual cost is going to be.
That's a big landing zone.
It really is. I feel like that's a pretty safe spot to be for them. But that is a huge deal for me. I would be really, really excited if we could pull that off. And quite frankly, the dollar amounts that we're talking, if you use that $1,600, it's just that $16 million. It's not a ton of money per year per firefighter, but it's something that needs to happen. I think we have spent so much money as a state, which I completely support, on apparatus, on aircraft, on all of these big flashy things, which is incredibly important. Don't get me wrong.
No, we haven't. Yep.
But now it's time to spend money on the men and women that are on the boots on the ground. And that's what I'm really, really excited about.
Let's look at it this way. It's time to modernize. The fire problem has grown. We're seeing over and over that parity in both wages and parity in hours worked per week. It's a safety thing.
Totally.
It really is. And it is time and it's going to be a tough one for the governor. It's going to be tough for the administration. He is taking it on more. I'll tell you, he has paid more attention to wildfire response thereof, prevention and vegetation management than probably the last 5 or 6 governors combined.
I would agree with that.
But we still need to get that workforce bumped up, and we need to see that safe staffing and a reasonable work schedule in place. And that's a hard lift. And we know it, and he knows it. I can tell you, we have a lot of partners on this, and CAL FIRE has a lot of partners on both sides of the aisle. And I know that it's very much appreciated. And one of the things that I tell firefighters This is such a big discussion. Local 2881 can't do it all by themselves. They're big, and they can do a big lift, but we need to join in with our brothers and sisters on this and across the board, because our fire problem and our fire season is not going to get shorter. Yeah. It's not going to get less complex, and it's not going to get less dangerous. And I can tell you, Heath, having partners like you is a very big deal for us, a very big deal.
No, and I appreciate that. And I completely agree with what you're saying. I mean, in 2005, the first campaign fire that went on was a cedar fire, right? And that was a career fire.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Well, we've had career fires, the 20 years since, almost 20 years. Right?
Isn't that amazing?
It's 18 years. That's insane to me, right?
And cedar was a fatality, correct? We lost we lost a young man out of Novato.
I think that's right. Yep.
Yes.
That's correct. So when we start talking about modernizing the fire service, I do agree with that. I think that is a challenge because it was the model back in the day, right? And they did a really good job of seasonals, and seasonal firefighters were the backbone for a very, very long time. And that's something that I think is something that we really need to remember. But I also know that these fires are burning faster, they're burning hotter, they're more complex than they have ever been.
Yeah.
And so we need people in there that are there all the time.
CAL FIRE is a very modern and progressive fire suppression and prevention agency. We're talking about the staffing model.
Correct.
To upgrade that. No one has, there's very few departments that have an air fleet like CAL FIRE and heavy equipment, operation. And what I don't want anybody out there is to think I'm not giving the due that's due there.
Oh, no.
We're talking about an area. It's people and staffing.
Totally, and you're absolutely right. I mean, those are two very different things. The governor has invested a ton of money to create one of the greatest, fire departments in the world, right? Certainly within our country. There's a lot of great departments. I am obviously selfishly biased to the state just because I love the men and women that do that work.
And you should be.
And I should be. You're right. I should be. But there is something on the personnel side that I think has been lacking. Yeah. And that is no disrespect to the men and women that were there when I was there because, like I said, a lot of them are still there, right?
Yeah.
So we just need to pay them properly. We need to, and then we haven't even talked about the mental health side of things. Like, the state of California, these guys are gone. I've got friends that were gone 300 days out of the year, right? 250 days out of the year. I'm sorry, every now and then, people are human. They need a break. And I think that mental health, as long as the physical aspects of it, is something that we really need to get on top of.
And that was the one, and you said it, and I do appreciate the governor for this because he has invested 100% in our behavioral health stuff.
Yes.
And it's like you said, it's all these things do come together, and we need to show and educate how they impact each other, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. And it's one of those ones. We had a staffing model that worked from when it was invented to now. Yeah. We have a year-round fire season. We got to make some adjustments.
That's right. It's as simple as that.
So, as a Republican in obviously a minority in Sacramento, both houses of the legislature are dominated by Democrats. There's a Democratic governor. What do you see as the challenges in working in the legislature and being a strong member of the Republican Party, but also kind of in that minority? How are you as effective as you are?
I mean, it's really, just be a good human being. Understanding that relationships are built by different personalities, right? Understanding, if you are from the inner city of LA, the way you grew up, your politics are going to be different than mine from the Central Valley.
Yeah.
And having that respect and being able to understand, listen, we're just going to have a difference of opinion.
Just because an assembly member puts a bill out there that you strongly disagree with and that you're going to oppose, it doesn't mean you hate them. Right. Or they're your enemy.
And I think that's something that people absolutely have to understand, even when you come in for lobby days, right? When you're talking to me as an elected official, right? I'm a human being. I may have had a really crappy day. Something might be going on at home. Something might be screwing around with my bill in another committee. I might have had an issue with, another member, right? So when you come in, there might be all these other things that are going on. So when you have this open, honest, helpful conversation, it goes so much further than just coming in throwing darts and being like, you idiot, you don't agree with me on this. You got to be stupid, right? There is a method to the madness of lobbying. And I will say, firefighters are always very good at that, quite frankly. But there are certain groups where you're just okay, that's not helping. Like you're just kind of ticking me off, right? And because at the end of the day, like we're humans, right?
Yes.
We're emotional.
Yep.
I mean, we can put on a poker face pretty well, but when you have these conversations with members, or when we have member-to-member conversations, the key to success is never make it personal. Keep it about legislation.
I think the lessons and the leadership that you as members in the legislature on both sides of the aisle, the ones that are leading, are really exempling that. And I think it's critically important. It's critically important to my membership, and it's critically important that not only my membership understands it and hears it, but they see it happen. Right. Because it's like men and women, if you're listening, there's certain things we should model as we go along, and not being polarized and not hating the other side for an issue is one of those areas. Absolutely.
No, it's remarkable. I mean, today's enemy is tomorrow's friend, right? And I think that mindset we really are reestablishing within the building. Because, I mean, when I first got here, it was there. I mean, I felt it, and I had great mentors. I really did. And once again, like coming out of the public safety world, your first years when you're a rookie and you don't say a lot, you just shut up and listen, right?
Yep.
And I sort of took that same, philosophy into public service and into politics. I think we're getting back to that really with this last election cycle, with the colleagues on the Democratic side that got elected, with the Republicans that got elected on our side, are really, for the most part, good, moderate members. And we're not the national. Like, we don't throw bombs at each other.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. Like, I mean, California deserves so much. Our citizens deserve us to be, professional. This idea that just flame throwing on both sides is beneficial. It benefits nobody except the individual.
Yeah.
And politics is a team sport with a lot of really, really big consequences.
Other areas of interest to you, not only for your district, but California in general, and maybe even if there's areas that those issues coincide or cross over for firefighters, what do you got out there? What are you looking at? Yeah. What partnerships are you envisioning?
Yeah, I think it's not a new issue. In my assembly district and really across the state, if you do polling, people care. Public safety and homelessness is a big deal, right? Fentanyl crisis is a big deal. Republicans have been very active on that, and it's a little bit harder, for my Democratic colleagues to wrap their heads around some of that. And there's reasons why. When you actually talk to them, I may not necessarily agree with them, but I certainly understand, some of them. And quite honestly, I'll just be very blunt. It's maybe in the 80s, the war on drugs, we might have went too far, one direction, right? I feel like there's an overcorrection currently. And I think somewhere in the middle is where we need to be. And I am encouraged by some of the conversations. Public safety, the homeless crisis is something that we as a state must stay focused on. Mental health is a huge, huge issue for a lot of us. I mean, you talk to your membership all the time, but we know most of the homeless population by name.
Yeah.
We just simply do, right? And I think until we are willing to address and be very blunt, put certain groups on kind of quiet time and do the right thing. I mean, sometimes people need to go do things that they don't really want to do, but it's the best thing for them. Right now, we don't really have that political will. Yeah. But I'm encouraged because I feel like we're making progress. I feel like the governor has taken steps in the right direction on that. Maybe not quite as fast as Republicans would think, but also understanding that he's balancing things out himself. So. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if, in doing some of the field operations we've done, Heath, if I go into a state, you and I could hit fire stations right now and ask, give us three of the biggest issues you're faced with. The number one thing they'll say is homeless response.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you. It's time for some folks to be made uncomfortable because what we're doing doesn't work. Yeah. And I don't care. You can talk to me till you're blue in the face. But when we can walk down different streets in different cities and see what we see, it's not working. No.
It really is fascinating to me. I get it. Like, I don't, want to step on anybody's toes, but it doesn't seem like it's a hard fix.
Oh,
but it's not complicated. We know what to do.
Yes, yes, and I think we're starting to see that with Care Court and some of the other reform. Yep. I mean, when you look at it, Heath, billions of dollars, federal, state, and local, are pumped into this issue. But it's like, whatever it is we're doing, and this is, there's no science involved in this. This is Brian Rice walking down the street in his city, in his community. Every day it seems like it's getting worse.
Yeah. To back your point up there, since 2018, we have spent $20.6 billion on homelessness. Okay. There's roughly 170,000 homeless people in the state of California currently. We are talking about some big numbers with very, very little to show for it, just to be very honest. And I was a huge supporter of Care Court. I think that's a great first step. Going over to Portugal, and seeing how they deal with, drug addiction, and how they deal with mental health over there as it relates to drug addiction. I think there's some interesting concepts there. Now you have a country of, I think Portugal's got 10 million people and 20,000 known drug users, so the scale of magnitude is a little bit different. But I think there's maybe some things that we could look at differently as a state of California. And I do believe the governor's office is doing that. Once again, it's probably not as fast as what I would like to, but we're sort of like in this institutional change, a mindset change. And sometimes those things don't, happen overnight.
Yeah. So. We're all human beings. Yeah. We all, if any one of us could sweep our hand across and it was over and people were healthy and not hurting and not in danger and were fed, and we would do it.
In a heartbeat.
But it's not that simple.
Yeah. And even if you gave a dollar amount to most people, said if you gave X dollar and we could wipe this out, I'm pretty sure we would all do that as well, right?
Yeah.
People do not want, we are human beings. Like, we actually genuinely care about each other, especially coming out of this world, right? And no, it breaks your heart. Like, when you see somebody, as frustrating as it is, but when somebody's defecating on the street, you're like, oh, serious? But then you're like, man, that is somebody's kid.
Yeah.
That's somebody's son, that's somebody's daughter, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a level of humanity that even myself, like, I've lost over time. Where, like, it's just like you get so frustrated with the problem.
We all have.
Yeah, like
we all have.
So it's like, we need to fix this. And I do think that every now and then people need to go to places that they may not want to be, so we can get them the help that they desperately deserve. So.
Yep. Well, listen, today on the Firewire, we've had Assembly Member Heath Flora. Heath, I want to thank you for joining me today on the Firewire. And as I've said, you have been a champion for our members in the legislature since the day you were sworn in. I know that we will continue working together on issues that matter to firefighters and their family and that matter to Californians. And any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, I just want to say thank you to you and your team. From the day that I got here, working with Megan and Doug and your lobbying corps, it's awesome, because in politics you know who you can trust, right? And you know who you can't. And CPF and your team is a group that I absolutely trust, and that trust is built on years of relationships and years of working together. And so for the listeners that are out there, understand that you are in good hands with CPF. You're in good hands with this leadership team. And I consider it a privilege to work with all of you on these issues. So thank you for inviting me.
Heath, I mirror all of that. It is just such a pleasure, not only to work together, but to touch base and to bounce issues off each other. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your friendship and your partnership. And with that, I'm the CPF President Brian Rice. This has been the CPF Firewire. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch everybody next time.
You can find CPF Firewire at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you find podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. You can also find CPF Firewire at the CPF website, www.cpf.org, and on the CPF YouTube page. We're always interested in getting your feedback, comments, and criticism. Tell us what you'd like to hear about. Drop us a line, info@cpf.org. CPF Firewire is a production of California Professional Firefighters. Our producer is Carol Wills. Our engineer is Matt McDermott. Please join us next month for another edition of CPF Firewire.